Good morning and welcome to the David and David on Real Estate episode. Today we are on episode number 141. David Corman, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Yeah, very excited to do this one, David. Always great to be with you, and looking forward to today's topic because we're going to talk about pricing and how you go about it, and different strategies and the pros and the cons. So it's an interesting topic for any realtor out there, and I'm curious about some of the things that we're going to talk about today and hear your responses on this.
Yeah, I think this is absolutely critical. We are seeing the market soften a little bit. And it's all about seller expectations. There's a lot of buyers out there. The demand hasn't stopped. Um, and I know we talked about this a couple episodes ago about the cyclical nature of real estate, the fact that, we're in the fall market, summer has just passed us, and we're back to a typical cycle where the summer is a little bit slower, people enjoy the weather, people enjoy the outdoors, and now with kids back to school and us being in the fall market, I think we're going to start seeing a little bit more movement. But pricing is the most important factor. It's the determining North Star of whether you're going to have a successful transaction or not. And the realtors that really master the tough conversations surrounding prices are the ones that are going to win. The ones that are just a yes, sir, yes, ma'am. Oh, you want to get this price? No problem. Let's test the waters. That is a recipe for disaster in this market. And that's why you and I really wanted to do this topic, because the realtors are going to win. The realtors are going to see transactional volume. The ones that are going to transact are the ones that are going to master the tough conversations surrounding prices.
So, David, you correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it sort of two conversations that you have to have with your client? One is, what's the real value in today's market? Like, when you're talking about managing expectation, what's the real value? What's the price that you really think it should sell for, or the range, the realistic range in the current market? And part of the discussion is, if we sold it a year ago, it might have been this, and if we sell a year from now, we don't know what it would be. But here's, I've done all my homework. I've looked all the comparables. I've looked at your property. I know it inside out. This is what I think it's really worth. Okay, the real value. And then that's sort of a separate conversation from, what's our strategy going to be to price it in order to achieve, hopefully, at least the real value, and maybe we can exceed it in the right circumstances, or we get lucky to some extent. And how do we protect ourselves about not having to take less than what we think is the real value, right? Because there's a difference between what you think the property is really worth and how you're going to price the property for selling purposes.
Yeah, Dave, it's so hard to mix those two concepts together. So I try to teach my realtors to separate the two concepts of your value proposition and the price for the property. So in a listing presentation, if you go in for a listing presentation, if you say something like, Mr. Seller, would you agree with me that the price is the price, and we can discuss that once you make a decision to hire me as your realtor? So let me tell you why you should hire me, what I'm going to do for you. Let's go through my whole marketing plan. And then once you determine, or we determine together, that I'm the right professional for the job, then we can discuss pricing, because the pricing won't change. It is what it is. The pricing is fixed. Your property is worth a market price, which I will get to. But the more important factor is, let's determine that I'm the right professional to help sell your house. And once we get that out of the way and we agree that I'm the right person for the job, I'm going to get into my pricing strategy for your property. And if you can do that successfully, um, that's where I think you're going to win as a realtor. Because if the seller chooses you based on the price that you give them, and the price is higher than all the other realtors, again, I think that's a recipe for disaster, and it's also starting off the relationship on the wrong foot. So if you can separate those two conversations, then it's a lot easier to have the tough pricing conversation. But you have to build trust first. You have to demonstrate why they should listen to you, why you're the right professional, and they need to trust you. And in today's market, a lot of that comes down to empathy. Mr. Seller, I know that, your house is your biggest investment. I know that you think your house is worth X, but let me share with you, why the market does or doesn't support that figure, right? But it's all about building empathy,
Empathy.
trust at the beginning of the relationship with the client first.
Right. Right. Everybody thinks their property is the greatest property in the world, and everybody's going to walk in and they're going to love my property, and then they get surprised and they find out every buyer that comes in wants to knock down walls and redecorate and can't stand the paint colors everywhere, and all that, the flooring that you take so much pride in because that you love it. You just never know what the next person's going to want, but everybody falls in love with their own house. So I think the worst thing you could do as a realtor, say, yeah, I know everybody's thinking it's worth $1 million, but I can get you 1.1. So hire me. Like that should never be the game plan. That puts you behind the eight ball, puts a lot of pressure on you. How are you going to deliver? And then if you can't deliver on that, you're never going to get referrals because no, I only hired that guy because he told me he can get more than everybody else. Like, why would you think you can get more than everybody else? You're going to sell it at a market price with a system, right? And so that's the worst strategy, and people fall into that thinking, oh, that's the only way I'm going to promise them I can get them more than everybody else is telling them. And then if I get lucky, maybe I will. But if I don't, I'll come up with some, it's not going to be my fault later, but it is your fault. And they're not going to be happy with you at the end of the day. You're not going to get the referrals. So you might get a commission on that transaction, but you're not going to have the relationship.
Right. And you always have to have a long-term outlook as a real estate professional. Never worry about this transaction, worry about the lifelong relationship with the client. And I think if you lead with price in your conversation, you're going to lose because that's all you're going to have to fall back on. Lead with everything else. Tell them who you are, tell them what you're going to do for them, show them what type of marketing you're going to do. Build trust and build the relationship. And price should be the last conversation you have in a listing presentation.
Yeah, I think it's critical because that's professionalism. That makes you a professional realtor that has confidence in their own abilities and their own systems and their own experience. And that's what they should be hiring, not something as best price. The worst thing I could do as a lawyer is say, oh, let me close your house transaction. I'll charge you $100 less than everybody else. So come to me. Like like I would never say something like that to me, and I would never do that. It would be no, come to me because I'm going to protect you and make sure you get a proper closing. When things go bad, we have experience, we've got systems, we've got experience, we know how to work things out. We're not going to overcharge you. You're going to pay us a fair, competitive amount, but you're going to get proper service and proper attention, proper experience, and you're going to have a good experience, and you'll have some comfort in that. Like the worst thing we do say is be about price. If you lead with price, you're screwed.
Yeah. So
That's
what
my
are
legal term.
so what are some of the strategies to really set the right pricing expectations? And I think you need to start with market analysis, right? So you need to look at comparable properties using similar sales, and you really need to determine a good baseline. And then talk about the current market conditions. What are current inventories doing? What are days on the market? What are pricing trends? What's happening with inflation? You have to educate the seller on really what's happening on the market. And then the other thing that most realtors don't do is get the seller to put themselves in the buyer's shoe. So when you're talking about inventory, book 2 or 3 appointments of comparable listings that are on the market, because guess what? The buyer is going to go see those properties. So
Right.
before determining a listing price, take the seller to see those competitive listings and say, Mr. Seller, look at the size of that kitchen, and it's renovated and the island is bigger. And guess what? This house has 2-car garage and it's a pie-shaped lot. So if you were a buyer, which property would you consider buying? Would you buy your house or would you buy this house? Well, I would buy this house. And why is that? Well, because XYZ. Okay, but so would you pay a higher price than this or would you pay a lower price than this for your house? Well, I would pay a lower price. Right? So a lot of this time you can spend and getting the seller to really set proper expectations and come down to reality on the listing price. So I think, booking a few appointments and checking out competitive listings that are currently on the market can be a great tool to set proper price expectations with your seller. And
Yeah.
then the other thing that you need to do, sorry, David, is
Okay.
also, talk about the psychology of pricing. So obviously there's certain price points, certain strategies that psychologically look better. Like instead of 1.1 million, 1,099,000 psychologically looks a lot better. So, there's a lot of strategies you can emphasize when determining the right list price and making sure that the listing stands out.
Yeah, and then there are it's all managing expectations, first of all, okay? Saying, Here's we think the value is. Here's our target. We want to try and get this much for your property, and this is why we think it's realistic. This is what that your neighbor sold for. This is what the guy around the corner sold for. You go through all those comparables. You try and set that value, and then you have to really have that discussion, like you said, David. What are the current market conditions? Like, are there way more buyers right now than sellers? Are there way more sellers than buyers? We're in different, we've gone through all kinds of different market conditions as the cycles go, right? So strategies change. So we were in a market for a while with the multi-bid offers where people were routinely, oh, it's worth $1 million, but we're going to list it for 850 because we want to drag a bunch of people into the process, get into a bidding war, and then we think we can get more than $1 million, more than the value if we get a bunch of people in. So that's always a great strategy if you're in a market where you can attract multi offers and push a price up above its real value. But now there's a market shift. Now you can't, there aren't as many buyers available out there. It's harder to attract that bidding war. So you, as an experienced realtor with the backing of your brokerage that's given you these discussions and giving you this advice, and right, you're coming up with, no, we can't use that strategy in September 2024 like we did in September 2023. It's the market's shifted. We got to deal with it differently. Here's what I think we should do, right? But you have to understand the market conditions.
Yeah, and also timing is also very important, David, because um, there's always a lot more activity on a new listing. People get excited, new listing to the property, realtors take a look at it. And if you're overpriced in the first 14 days of a property being listed on the market, you lose about 60% of that market activity. So if you come on the market at the wrong price, in the first 14 days, it really hurts you. And as the listings on the market longer, realtors and clients lose interest. Oh, I've seen that property. That property was on the market 2 weeks, it's still there.
Right, still
What's
there.
something wrong with this property? It's been listed for 90 days. Why isn't it selling? You know what? There's 4 other properties that are brand new to the market. I'm going to show those first. I'm going to show this property later because, my time as a professional is valuable. I want to show the property that's going to sell. I don't want to show the stale, dated property that's been on there that my buyer has been looking at for 90 days. There must be something wrong with it. Maybe the neighbors are loud, or maybe there's garbage around the corner or something's wrong with it. I'm going to show these other properties. They're fresh, they're new. It's like having a fresh loaf of bread that's still warm versus one that's rock hard. Like, if you're going to buy a loaf of bread, which bread would you want? right? So
Right.
I think pricing it properly at the onset is so important because 60% of your activity is going to be there within the first 14 days. And if you miss that cycle, it's really hard to figure out, okay, how do I get those 60% of the people who've already seen the property that was overpriced initially back to the table? How do I get them excited? It's a lot harder to do that the second time around.
Yeah. And I know you pay a lot of attention, David, to like, days on the market. And that's an important number, right? To know what's going on generally in the industry or generally in a particular neighborhood. Like and that's part of managing expectations because we want to price properly. We go to market and we want to try and sell it within that window because that's the sort of the accept. Otherwise, it gets stale and then we got a problem, right? You won't, so you want to do it. But that days on the market numbers change too, right? It's very different today than it was a year ago.
It is. We're seeing it climb, which is an important trend that our industry really has to focus on and keep track on. Back during COVID, the days on the market, I think was 4 or 5 or 6. It was extremely low. Now we're seeing that number edge a little bit higher. The last time I looked, it was around 17, 23 in different markets. And that's the statistics of whether we're in a balanced market or seller's market as well. But it can also give you a lot of different feedback in terms of when do you make a pricing adjustment. If you know that the average day on the market is 23, you probably wouldn't suggest make a corrective action at day 14 because it's a little early.
Right. You
If
still have time.
Right. If you've done your work properly, if you priced properly from the onset, if you've overpriced, then you're always going to be behind that 8 ball from day one. But I think in terms of looking at opportunities in the market like we're in as well, I think looking at it from backward side and looking at, hey, if I'm working with an investor that's looking for opportunities, then maybe I should look at what's on the market for a little bit longer. Maybe I should, call some of these listing agents that have been on the market 90 to 160 days and let me test some of their motivations because there's definitely going to be more motivation in that higher days on the market. So, as a realtor, pay attention and if you kind of reverse engineer your search and look for those higher day on the market listings, there could be a lot of opportunities out there for you as well.
That's a great point. Like you made a lot of great points, but I like that the best of everything you said so far because it's true. Because on the one hand, something is sitting there that's getting stale. It's, oh, there might be something wrong with this property. Let's stay away from it. But to another group of buyers, that's an opportunity. Like that's a strategic opportunity. Let's take a look at that because there could be an opportunity to get this for less than market value. And maybe it's a fixer upper but we have the ability to do that. We'll pay a little less to buy it and we can fix it up and whatever those warts are that's keeping it on the market. So, somebody's that will pass. It's a different buyer. It's the perfect opportunity for them. So I think that's a great point, David. You got to know your buyer.
Absolutely. And the last closing point I wanted to make is, um, realtors are frustrated. There's not enough showings on some of their listings. And sometimes we can be doing everything we can, and it's just the function of the market. And the worst thing you can do is not communicate with the seller. So whether you have activity on your listing or you don't, I think communication is the key. You know, communicate with the seller and make it consistent, whether there's no showings, whether there's no activity, even if there's fewer activity, over communicate. It will not hurt you. But if you fail to communicate effectively with your seller, then they're going to blame you um, for the lack of activity, and it's going to tarnish your relationship. But if you're a professional and you over communicate, and you don't have to communicate about the property, you can communicate about the market. Hey, look, your neighbor sold, or hey, this is what's happening with inflation, and this is what's happening with inventory levels, and this is an event happening in your neighborhood. But communicate more. I think it's going to be the determining factor whether that is a positive relationship, even if the market is not where you expect it to be.
Yeah, that's a great point, David. And that's why it's important to show up at things like coffee with Gio in your office and just discuss with other agents that come back. What last weekend, I know you had a showing there. Any traffic? No, it's really quiet. Or yes, there was a bunch of showings, and you find out what other people are doing when you're part of an office like yours, a brokerage like yours, because there's a whole bunch of realtors. You're not on an island unto yourself and only have your experience of what your showings may have been. You get a better feel for the market when you're communicating with other people in your own office and understanding trends and what's going on, and look at the stats that are available, because like you said, you've got to pass that information on to your clients to keep them informed. So they never think it's your fault. Oh, we didn't have any showings because my realtor was out golfing or something. No, we didn't have showings because this is the market. It's just slow right now. Everybody's having reduced showings. So you want them to understand that before the date for the showings. It's a little slow right now, but we're going to do what we can. Hopefully we get a few people in. You never know. Keep the communication open. You're always better off. You don't want, otherwise it's all your fault. It's not your fault. It's the market.
Yeah. And it's so easy as a realtor to get into that train of thought is, oh my God, I haven't had any showings. I don't have any good news to report. So I'm not going to report anything at all. And that is the biggest mistake you can make as a professional is keep communicating. And, it's not your fault that there's no good news to communicate, but communicate the bad news too. And that's okay. If you're going to keep the doors open, it's going to be a much, much better relationship and a more professional relationship. And as a professional, it's your job to communicate both the good news and the bad news and keep that line of communication open all the time. And we're seeing it a lot now. We're seeing a lot of the listings agents say, hey, I don't have any good things to communicate to the seller, so I haven't reached out to the seller. And that is a big mistake. So don't fall into that category and over communicate. And sometimes your seller just, they just need to know you're there. They just need to know that you're there and you're available and you're there to support them through it. And that's very powerful.
Yeah, you're managing expectations, and at the same time, you're adjusting your strategy, and you're always keeping that communication open. Here's what's going on. Here's what happened. This was our strategy, but we might have to adjust it a little bit because the conditions are shifting a little bit. Maybe we need another showing date. Maybe we don't need. Maybe we got to do an adjustment on price. Like but let it always be part of your professional advice and strategy and communication. And they're part of the process and part of the decision-making process. And they're never just, oh, it's quiet right now, so I'm going to do nothing for 2 weeks. Like, you never want them to feel like they've been abandoned. If things are a little quiet, it's because it's quiet in the market. So we may have to shift our strategy. Let's discuss it and have them part of the process. They take ownership of the process, and then it's never coming back in a negative way to you as the realtor.
Absolutely. David, this has been a great discussion. Thanks for joining us this morning. And if you have any questions or if you have any topics, then please send us an email. We love hearing from you. Subscribe and thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.